So to begin this evening, just kind of a little bit of quick history. The San Ramon Valley has had more than a 200-year-old history of ranching, which included the Wiedemann Ranch, a working cattle ranch still today. It all started with Christian Wiedemann, one of the early pioneers of San Ramon. He sailed from Eckernford, Germany to San Francisco in 1855. He found work there before coming to San Ramon in 1867 and built the home where it still stands today. He used the skills he had developed and picked up along the way to make a living here through varied animal production and use of resources on the land and more. The ranch grew and more crops were introduced by the next generations. So, do you ever wonder what it was like growing up on a ranch in San Ramon Valley? Well, we're honored to have 3 Wiedemann siblings to present what a wonderful place it is to grow up on a ranch, and it still is today. Community involvement was key to the fun and to the work. They had unique experiences and interesting neighbors like the Norris family. Occasionally, they'd go to San Francisco for a big night out. So we are treated to be able to hear firsthand about life in the early years of the San Ramon Valley through stories from our presenters. And so our speakers this evening are the Wiedemann siblings, Jeff, Sandee, and Roxy. Roxy, Jeff, and Sandee are direct descendants of Christian Wiedemann, one of the 1860s pioneers of the San Ramon Valley. Today, the 5-generation Wiedemann Ranch is an historic cattle ranching operation. 4th-generation rancher Jeff Wiedemann said that although the tools and methods of the Wiedemann ranching may have changed, love for the land and work has not. Roxanne, who lives in the house her great-grandfather built, still has the love for animals and raises them and takes them to the fair each year. In addition, she is known for her role on the San Ramon Valley Fire Board. Sandee's 2 passions are volunteering for the board of Shepherd's Gate and serving our veterans as an expression of appreciation. Jeff's participation has involved the Cattlemen's Association and Farm Bureau. Each generation of the Wiedemanns has been involved in serving the community in a variety of ways and continue to do so in 4-H, the San Ramon Valley Museum, Cattlemen's Farm Bureau, and other community functions. So now I'd like to turn it over to our stars, our presenters this evening.
I know. I think hopefully get the microphone working. You know, that's Northern California, actually. It's up near Mount Lassen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it looks like it. It's mountain country up there for sure. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Very nice to be here. It's an honor and a pleasure. And I have some notes here, so I'm probably going to read because it's a lot to remember. That'll do.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's my presentation. So I just want to point out that being here with the historical group, I guess it's official now. I'm an old timer. Didn't really have that in mind, but it happens to the best of us. It's kind of fun. But I'd like to, well, I was going to introduce my wonderful family, but I guess everybody's already been introduced. So I can't tell you how great they all are. But let me go ahead and start. I'm going to talk a little bit about growing up on the Wiedemann Ranch, and really most of my memories, my deepest memories, are about work. And it's kind of the nature of the ranching business. So I'm going to talk about the various crops that we produce during the course of a year. And but first, what is a ranch? I know you all are pretty familiar with this, but a ranch typically produces livestock, and a farm produces crops. Well, we did both, and pretty typical for this area. And but there's a lot more to it. Whether it's a homestead or a 5-acre ranchette or your own backyard, a ranch is kind of a business, a lifestyle, an opportunity, a burden, and a joy. We need to understand biology, mechanical engineering, labor, finance, the weather, the law, the markets, and on and on. So it seems like a pretty simple job, but it's actually pretty complex. So our ranch grew from the mid-1800s with peak production in the early and mid-1900s on about 9,400 acres in the San Ramon Valley. Our principal crops were cattle, hay, grain, and walnuts. I grew up working on those crops since I was probably 9 years old, something like that. And so I'd like to share a little insight on how we produced each crop and what it was like. So starting with grain, I passed around I just had a few copies of pictures that kind of have a look at grain production. And but it tends to be dry land, small grain production, which is wheat, barley, oats, stuff like that. Been produced in this area for a long time. In my lifetime, most of the grain planting was relegated to the moderately sloped hillsides because the orchards occupied the better bottomland. And so, if you're starting to plant a grain crop, you get out your collection of Caterpillar tractors, Farmall wheel tractors, which one of which is parked in the tractor barn, that's the hill there. Discs, cultivators, and harrows, all assembled to plant the grain. So if you happen to have a little packet of pictures here, I started out with, I guess that's credit maybe my dad Howard, but just going back too far, not my lifetime. We were out there harvesting grain on a hillside, and here you got a harvester being pulled by 18 horses, if you can imagine that. And I had to get up in the morning and harness them. And so that was some pretty early stuff. You can imagine, I heard the runaways were terrible. Anyway, so then here's another picture of us hanging around, standing in front of an old harvester. And then you go a little further, and you get into the side hill harvesting stuff. This is a little more modern version. And it's kind of interesting because you can imagine this giant machine on a really steep angle, and how they were able to not roll down the hill. pretty remarkable. So what you do is you get out there in the morning and you have a field, and you start in the middle and you get your tractor going and pulling a disc probably, which will dig up the ground, and you just start on this horizontal plane from one end of the field to the other. And then when you get to the other end, you turn around and follow that same line. And multiple passes, multiple tractors, and pretty soon the whole thing is turned up and ready to plant. So we'd start about 7 o'clock in the morning, go till 5:30. Kind of a monotonous job, but it's one of the more exciting things that would happen is you'd be driving along with your tractor, side hill, here comes the guy in another tractor, and then you get to wave at the other guy. That was a big deal. So anyway, so you work up the ground, then you get out your seed sower. In our case, we mostly use a broadcast, spews it out the back, seed sower, so you have to calibrate the amount of seed that goes into the ground so that it's not too close together, too far apart. So that was pretty scientific. You had to get off your tractor, walk around in the back, and then you put your hand on the ground, and if there's 5 seeds in there, that's approximately the right amount of planting. So all very scientific. So there weren't very many large equipment repair businesses in the area, so you'd have your own shop or borrow your neighbor's welder, lathe, drill press, whatever. And improvisation was the key. A lot of the equipment was improvised to save money or was just not available. And so you ended up with some pretty fanciful but functional equipment welded together out of miscellaneous parts. One of my favorite seed sowers was a combination of an upside-down truck differential, belts, pulleys, homemade seed hopper, small auger, old broadcast device, all rolling along on wooden wagon wheels and car tires. So you imagine it's kind of it was painted the same color, but you can tell it's not made in a factory. So anyway, so grain harvest took place in the late summer, and that's where the custom hillside self-leveling harvesters were hired for that job. That you had to negotiate a price with the picky grain buyers, that they would always find some excuse to, I don't think that grain looks kind of pinched, or it's got a few seeds in there, I don't think they're giving much of a price. And so we have to negotiate your way out through the other end of it. So the next crop is hay that we produced, and now the hay was always a big part of the summer, the spring, summer, and then in the winter, of course, you feed it out. But we used a 3-way rotational system to produce the hay. It started out with a pasture being grazed. Basically, if you're grazing just resting a pasture with cattle on it, not much happening. Then the next year, that field would be planted to a grain crop, and then that year following that, the field would produce a non-cultivated volunteer hay crop. So you're constantly going from field to field, and mixing up the use so that the field has time to recover, and hopefully you get a little better crop. But again, the hay production took place mostly on the hillsides, and in mid to late spring, the hay fields were cut using a sickle bar mower. And there's a picture of one over here. Over here, tractor that we use a lot of. It's this one here, a model M, International Harvester, with a sickle bar mower. It's more of a flatland tractor, but you could use it on the hillside. So again, you're going along the side of the hill. You're kind of riding the brake, so that the tractor stays on the line. You're trying to cut the hay, and you come to a dip, and maybe a little spring or something. And so it's pretty interesting and kind of fun, there's a lot of work, a lot of long days, and all that. So, but mostly on the hillside. So then the hay is cut, it's sun dried. In a few days, it's raked in the windrows and then baled. Baling took place at dawn to incorporate the moisture into the bales, and then the bales were pushed into stacks with a buck rake. Basically, was a contraption to catch all the bales and bring it into a pile. And then for most of the summer, those hay bales were loaded from the stacks onto our trucks, which is kind of another real collection of 16-foot flatbed trucks. You stack it 5 or 6 high, and some nervy people that even go higher than that. So we're trying to get the hay back to the barn. And so those 110-pound bales were stacked to the rafters by a crew of 5 or 6 into the hot, dusty barns. We put up 600 or 800 tons of hay every year. The best hay, usually oat hay, was sold for horse hay. The next best hay was sold and delivered to other ranchers. And then the next best hay was put into our own barns for the cattle, and whatever was left over went to our horses. So they were practicing the sheep hay, and horses usually get fed first, but not ours. So it was a very good exercise, you can imagine. We all hear throwing hay bales around all summer. And so my 8th grade graduating class was 6 kids. And going into high school is kind of a culture shock. You can imagine where all these kids come from. And so walking around the campus there, the football coaches spotted me and said, hey, you farm boy, get over here and you stand on the scrimmage line and don't let anybody by. That was about the depth of my football knowledge, but it was fun to do. So we fed the hay to the cattle in the fall and winter to increase carrying capacity and improve nutrition. So that's what we did with the hay. Walnuts began to appear in the early 1900s throughout the San Ramon Valley and points north. Production took place mostly in the fall. We harvested and custom harvested about 600 acres from South San Ramon to Danville. To harvest the nuts, the orchard floors were cleared and compacted with smooth rollers to prepare for picking, either by mechanical pickers or by seasonal pickers. For many years, our walnuts were picked by a family that organized a picking crew traveling from Sunnyside, Washington, south to Ventura County. They would start with, I don't know what the crops were, that they would turn around and head north, and just as the season developed, they would follow the crops. And so we had a migrant worker camp, which was a few houses that housed the pickers and their families during that season. So to harvest the walnuts, first you climb up a tree and attach a rope to a sturdy branch. The other end of the rope is attached to a tractor, which shakes the tree vigorously, the branch, and then the walnuts fall to the ground, and then you move to the next branch. And not long after that, the hydraulic boom was implemented, and one person on a tractor could grab a branch and shake it with it. with the tractor. So, you know, things progress. So collecting the nuts was done either by hand in the burlap sacks or later with mechanical harvesters and bulk handling. Walnuts were then pulled and dried at various locations, including the Boone Farms hulling, sorting, and drying facility. And I understand that there may be some restoration of that particular hulling and drying facility here, which would be great, because kind of a tribute to the walnut industry in the San Ramon Valley. And I do have kind of fond memories of, so one of the aspects of a hulling and drying operation is you have a conveyor belt with a bunch of gals sitting on the chairs, and the nuts are going by, and then they pick out something that's discolored or broken or something like that, and so you end up with a nice assortment of walnuts. So walnuts were a pretty important crop here for us. I think we got in early on it, and we were able to expand our business somewhat, largely through the walnut business. So lastly, the cattle enterprise started with my great-grandfather. In the 1860s, Christian Wiedemann bought a small herd of cattle in the Wiedemanns brand that's still in use today. Our cattle production grew here in the late 1800s, grazing the less arable land of hills and following the rotational system. Today, our family and some excellent part-time help continue our cattle operations. So we are a smooth running machine. Cattle are a year-round enterprise, not the most profitable, but a crop that requires the most attention. Calving in the fall, branding in the winter, feeding in the winter, building or repairing fences, retrieving stray cattle, vaccinating cows, calves, yearlings, buying bulls, selling calves, providing water, and on and on. Horses have always been an essential part of gathering and moving cattle. Branding, the only legal means of identification, often requires horses. In fact, branding calves by roping on horseback is a very old tradition dating back to the Spanish. That tradition continues today, along with the tradition of helping the neighbors rope, brand, and vaccinate their calves. And today the market, little plug here for our modern operation. The market demands the safe, nutritious, earth-friendly production of cattle. We couldn't agree more. Our cattle are pampered almost like domestic dogs. Like most cattle producers and public land managers, we are learning more about sustainable range management and are implementing successful ideas that we encounter. But after over 160 years of grazing the same healthy pastures, we must be doing something right. That's what it said. So in conclusion, there's an old cowboy poetry poem about the boss, and I don't have it, and I'll spare you the pain of having to listen to somebody recite cowboy poetry. But basically, it claims that you cannot tell who the boss is because they look just like and work just as hard as the rest of the crew. That was always my experience on the ranch and others around us. It's not a complaint, it's a badge of honor. So that's what we do. We work, we have fun, and we are very lucky to have had the experience. Thanks for your interest. I'd like to turn to my sister Roxanne to continue along. Thank you.
really not fair to have to follow that. It's really good. But I'm going to try. My mom and dad were married in 1943 and came to live on the ranch. And I was born in 1944. World War II was still going on. We lived next door to my Aunt Ann, and my Grandma Maddie had passed away when I was 4, so I didn't know her very well, but Ann lived with Grandpa Wiedemann right next door. It was great to have them, but I have to admit, well, they had a TV and we didn't, so we went up there a lot. And they had something else that we didn't. They had a cookie jar with cookies. And we didn't. So we would go next door fairly often. We had 4 great aunts. They were great aunts, but 2 of them were my grandfather's sisters and lived in the original house on the ranch. And 2 were my grandmother Maddie's sisters. They lived in Castro Valley. So 4 great aunts that were not married, that had no other children except us. So we were very fortunate. The Castro Valley aunts took us to Santa Cruz every year, and that was before freeways. So we would go down and spend the day at Santa Cruz. It was just a great time. Mary and Rose, they had chickens and a whole different lifestyle. And the funny thing about it is, that's exactly the way I live today in the same house. So I am so fortunate to be there. Horses. We've got Rosemary here. We all, Sandee, Jeff, Haley, Christine, Frida. We rode horses, and they were a huge sense of freedom. We could go where we wanted. It was just such a treat to be able to ride horses. Sometimes we would gather cattle. Gathering up in the hills along the western side of the valley, where it's so steep, is a challenge because the cattle like to go down in the creeks, into the shade, and all of that. So we did our best to get everything. But gathering cattle on the east side of the valley was much nicer. No trees, rolling hills. The lakes were there, the stock ponds for the cattle. So I liked when we gathered cattle on that side. Grandpa Wiedemann didn't yell at us nearly as much. Our friends, like I say, Rosemary, we would ride around the valley on Saturdays. Judy Ashworth was another one that lived close by. So it was fun to have horses and to have that freedom. There was no freeway sounds, so it was pretty nice. Mr. Peixote, who lived, the Peixote family up by the county line at the top of the hill, he would pick us up and take us to school. His sons, John and Gilbert, were also going to San Ramon Grammar School and Danville San Ramon High. We would walk home often, and it wasn't too far from the grammar school, I guess maybe a mile or so, but we'd walk across the fields and up Norris Canyon. I remember when I first started doing that, I stopped to visit with Mrs. Norris.
she was just such a dear friend. And I saw Mom go down the road, and I thought, where do you suppose she's going? Well, she was going to look for me, because she had no idea I was visiting with Mrs. Norris. So we had a little conversation about that. But the Norris brothers, Noli and Lee, we often went to their house. And it was an early lifestyle that they lived. Wood stove and outhouse, and it was so natural. We enjoyed going next door and visiting them. So seasons were big. The roundup, as Jeff mentioned, the roundup I anticipated just almost like Christmas. Counting the days until getting my horse ready, getting my tack clean. And my friends all like to do the same thing and got new jeans. The smell of new jeans means roundup to me. We have a shirt and sometimes a hat. And the branding was very special, and at that time I didn't realize how unique it was. They were branding the chiefs with the year, chief brand, the PS for pelvis, that was on the back left hip. They vaccinated, they cut a notch in the ear so that when you were looking at a cow or a calf or steer or whatever, you could tell from their earmark where they belonged. So cattle occasionally walked over, through, around fences, and neighbors' cattle would get mixed up. In summer, there were big stacks of hay that we would play in. We would ride our horses down, and mostly east of Highway 21 out in the flat there. And so they would buck the hay up to the baler. Rosemary Smith probably could tell you a heck of a lot more about baling than I could. But Mitchell, of course. So we would drive the little Fordson and lift the hay into the barns, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We got pretty good at shifting, but also loading the hay on the trucks after it was baled. Sometimes there were 5-wire bales. I guess in the early days there were 5-wire bales. And one of our early jobs was to walk down the rows, and the bales came out of the baler upright, and the truck couldn't pick it up until they were flat. So we were very handy for walking down the rows and pushing the bales over. Fascinating work. Really good pay. So we always took our vacation after the hay had been put away, before the walnuts started. And often we would go as a family to Lake Tahoe. Mom and Dad loved to go up there, and so did we. My mom taught 4-H, and she taught tailoring. The Extension Service through Contra Costa County wanted to teach community women certain skills that they could take to the other women, what the University of California was developing. So that's what the Extension Service provided 4-H. 4-H is still sponsored by the University of California, and it helps spread the word of what the kids need to learn about 4-H, and raising animals, raising sheep or steers. I am lucky enough to have room to have kids come up with their 4-H goats or 4-H sheep and see the kids raise those animals, and they're darn hard-working kids. They feed in the morning and at night. They keep the animals clean, the pens clean, all for the county fair. So go to Contra Costa Fair sometime. It's a little further away and not as big as Pleasanton, but it's a really nice down-home fair. So, yes, the walnuts were big in the fall. But for me, I think about kids came. We had somebody to play with. So because the families all came and they stayed in the little houses. Sometimes the walnut pickers' kids would even come to school with us. But it was fun to have neighbors for a little while. My grammar school was 3 rooms. We used 2 of them. In the beginning, rented one to Charlottewood School until their school was finished. And then we used the middle room for movies until we had enough kids. A lot of kids came to us from the Army. They were running the Nike base at the end of Bollinger. And so that was a new world. Kids that we hadn't known our whole life. So anyway, they were great, and we learned a lot. The old hall was a really important part of our lives. We had graduation ceremonies there. In the early days, there were dances and parties, all kinds of things happening. And the hall was near where Morgan's Masonry is now. But there was a stage there, there was a kitchen upstairs, and so that was a really important building for us. We had the Christmas program there, cute little Christmas program, I'm sure. So Santa Claus would come. I think my Aunt Anne was even Santa Claus one year because you couldn't tell with the beard, and she was tall. So anyway, the hall was an important building, and we had 8 in our class. There's another graduate. Philip, where are you? Yeah, Rosemary, you guys went. Oh. and so there's some of us that have stuck around, but things were really so much smaller. I'm terribly grateful to have been born a Wiedemann. I love my husband. I was married for 53 years, but my life has been very good, and I'm grateful for that. So next is my sister Sandee.
I may overlap some of Roxy's information and Jeff's, and might even have a different look at it. I don't know. We'll just see about that. But I just want to start. Roxy's introducing people, and I want to introduce Don Wood. If you don't already know the famous Don Wood, you should know Don. He's not only huge in the valley, the Wood family. He's huge in our family, and we work very closely over the years. So, hey, Don. Oh, and it's me, son Jim. Well, first, I want to thank you, Jeff. Okay, good, because this is heavy. First, I want to thank you, Jeff, keeping the ranch going, and I still get to live here. Nancy, his wife, might not have known much about ranching when they got together 40 plus years ago, but quickly became a cowgirl and a great partner to Jeff in the work. Of course, Christian and Clayton, they too make their contributions. I'm very grateful that I can still live on the ranch because of your work. So here's what I'm gonna do. I feel like I just enjoyed the fruits of the labor around the ranch, although Roxy and I were of some help when we all rode horseback with Dad, Jeff, and the crew to get the cattle out of the hills. Sometimes we drove the small Ford tractor that's been discussed. Roxy and I would be in our cutoffs and our t-shirts and just in the shade there, and we'd be backing the Fords and tractor back and forth, and the bales would go off the truck into the hayloft, and Jeff would be up there. He's doing all the work. He's in the pretty dusty and the hay all over him like that. So yeah, we got pretty good. Sometimes we ride horseback as discussed and help move the cattle out of the hills, and love that. So we're 13 months apart. Roxy said 1944, 45, and 46, and they finally got the boy. Our first home was the Norris Canyon house that our grandparents fixed up and moved into. Then Mom and Dad did the same. Later, Roxy and Randy fixed it up and lived there before moving up the road to the home place where it all started. When we were teenagers, we moved across the creek, as Roxy said, and helped some with the building our new ranch-style house. We even got our own TV. As we grew up, Roxy and I didn't see as much of Jeff. He worked on the ranch at an early age, and the men on the ranch crew were a big part of our growing up. Their families lived on the ranch or in nearby houses. Most of them stayed for many years, so we grew up with them and knew their wives and kids very well. They felt like family. Our somewhat close neighbors were Grandpa and Grandma and Aunt Ann. Our Aunt Ann on one side. As Roxy said, Grandma died fairly early, but Ann and Grandpa were a really big part of our lives. Ann later married Al Cattlemen and gave us 3 great cousins next door, who are here tonight as we introduce Christine and Haley and Frida. They too are still ranching. On the other side was the Norris family. Lee and Nolie Norris were called the Norris boys until they died of old age. Everybody's got a kick out of that. I think the Aunt Mary and Aunt Rose were called the Wiedemann girls. Wasn't as much of a joke. So we spent a lot of time at their place, mostly out in their orchard as they shot birds trying to eat the fruit off the trees. It was great to have family around all the time. Aunt babysat for us sometimes and was a very good sport. I think we all spent time with Grandpa. I see that you can hear me better when I point it this way. I'm really sorry about that. I'm kind of a novice at this. Okay, and old. Okay. So, I think we all spent time with Grandpa driving around the hills in his pickup. We often hung out at the barn, too. The ranch workshop was there where equipment was created and repaired. Corrals and pastures were part of the scene. There was a lot to entertain us around the barnyard, like climbing on old stuff in the pastures, playing in the hayloft or the granary, or taking care of our horses. When Grandpa was around, he'd sometimes have rules for us. One memorable one was when we were like 10 or 12, he said, "Don't smoke in the barn." So we held up to that. Well, sadly, the Bolander Canyon Road expansion went right through the barnyard and took out everything. So Jeff had to scramble to find other places to operate on. We visit Grandpa's sisters at Marionette Rose, who lived at the home place where they were born and lived into their late 80s. Mary and Rose spent their last few years at the glass house when it was a care facility before it was moved. So I remember visiting Aunt Rose there, and she asked me, "Did you bring the buggy to take me home?" So well, I think she forgot that she asked me, so that was good. Mary and Rose drove a buggy till 1945. They never drove a car, but everybody else was in their car and they were still driving the buggy. I don't think they went very far, but they went, to San Ramon. Sometimes our city cousins from Mom's side of the family and their parents would visit for entertainment. The kids pulled each other around in an old buggy, played in the barn, and even had some snipe hunts for the cousins. They still talk about the snipe hunts. San Ramon had two gathering places, Bill Ferrer's General Store, which was also the post office, a gas station, car repair, and headquarters for the volunteer fire department. Billy Ferrer, as you probably all know, became fire chief when San Ramon Valley Fire District was formed. Billy Ferrer III, I guess he would be called, and his sister Ginny are here. Ginny, raise your hand. Ferreras are here. Hey, Billy, come on. Yeah, we were really close with the Ferreras too. It was just a great place to grow up. The old store had a wood stove, and the old timers would be there gathered around exchanging stories. The floors creaked, and the atmosphere was real homey. It was always fun to go in there. Of course, we knew everybody, and everybody knew everybody. Most local events were held at the San Ramon Hall. The Mothers Club had events there. There are lots of events. And the three of us had our 8th grade graduations there. In later years, it was turned into a theater. Local talent was used, and Dad changed his clothes out of his blue work shirt and Levi's and boots, and got dressed up and starred in Bell Book and Candle at the theater. And he did other great plays too. It was really fun to see that role. Okay. San Ramon Grammar School was 1st through 8th grade and typically totaled 60-ish students, 1st through 8th grade. Pretty fun to go to school when you were a kid and you got to know that 8th graders, and everybody in between. So Foxy said there are 3 rooms in the new school. It was a new school. She missed the 2-room schoolhouse by 1 year. And there were 6 kids in my class too. Roxanne, Jeff, and I walked across the field to school. And one year we were in 1st, 2nd, 3rd grades in the little room, and the principal, Mrs. Gans, was our teacher. Kind of a compact unit. Each year the families picking walnuts came for a short time. We looked forward to them coming back. Each year there were everybody growing up. Sometimes a new family would move to San Ramon and the school might grow to 65 students. The highlight of each school year was the day the whole school walked across the field to our house to swim. Dad built one of the only ponds in the valley in 1950 with his D4 Caterpillar tractor and his ranch crew. He later added a very high slide, and I think he enjoyed that as much as we did. 2 events brought crowds to the ranch. Roundups where neighboring ranchers came to help brand the cattle, but also drew a couple hundred people there just to watch. We took a break for lunch where a large amount of hot dogs, beans, potato salad, and more were served. And another annual event was Kite Day up in the high windy hills. Roxy and Randy started the Kite Day and we celebrated it 48 years. Yeah, it was a great time. It was a very popular event with many people flying kites around the hills. It was great to see generations of friends as people brought their kids and their kids brought their kids. And it went on. Our friends brought their friends, and the event grew very large. The skies were full of kites, and dinner followed down at Roxy and Randy's. Each family brought a side dish and a can of chili, and chili was all poured into a really large pot. Whether you brought a spicy chili or a no-meat chili, you got what you got. Mom and Dad were very fun and very interesting. And we did a lot as a family. We had Friday night, game night. Dad usually won whatever we were playing. And after dinners, we sometimes went out deer hunting or we'd go fishing in one of the ranch's cow ponds, which Dad created. We had the benefit of living a rural life right outside of San Francisco, where we sometimes went to have dinner and see a play. We went to Sandee Boardwalk every year. Dad liked to water ski and we went to Lake Area. It was always great to come back home. There were few neighbors on North Canyon Road, but they added to our lives. Leslie Thomas, who lived about 2 miles up the road, was known for driving by while honking, waving, and tipping his pith helmet. He always said, "Here comes Leslie." It was a great tradition. The Freitas and Peugeot families were farther west. Sometimes, I didn't remember Mr. Peugeot taking us to school, but Roxy was older. More into it. But I remember sometimes Mrs. Peugeot, when we were walking home, would stop and give us a ride. And we were always glad to see her. Our first horse was a pony named Dick. He was a challenge, and fortunately not too far off the ground because he was a bucker. We moved up to Pal, who was a calm old boy, and eventually we each had a horse to ride. We rode bareback until we were able to put a saddle on by ourselves. That was the rule. Opening day of deer season brought a crowd of family and friends for breakfast at 5 a.m. Adults went out on the hunt, and the kids tucked back into their sleeping bags in the living room. everyone had a great day, whether a deer was brought home or not. Oh, in the early 1950s, we had an international visitor. The Prime Minister of Pakistan came to San Ramon. Liaquat Ali Khan visited the ranch with a large number of guards, and I remember a whole bunch of black cars and some reporters. He came to the house and gave us all a memorable experience. He was looking at American agriculture and how we lived and planning to take the latest ingenuity back to Pakistan. Mom and Dad were very involved in the community and sort of through their role modeling in so many ways encouraged us to be very involved in the community. I think we're all very glad we're very involved. Later, Jeff became, so Roxanne talked about the 4-H, but I want to add that Jeff became a beef leader and for 4-H, and Roxy was a leader over many years for many different animals and still provides for the 4-Hers today. And when I talk to them or to their mothers, they just say, you know, the kids wouldn't be able to have this experience without Roxy having a place for them to store their animals and come and check them twice a day. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, the San Ramon sign read 100 people till 1965. When 680 was finished, there might have been 200 people by then. My memories of growing Roxy and Randy, and some other people one night accidentally backed into the San Ramon sign and it fell into the pickup. And we didn't know what to do because what a situation, and so we took it home to Dad. Rocky still has it. My memories of growing up in this community are about people helping people, working together, and being involved in making San Ramon a wonderful place to live and very fun. Thanks for being here. It's sure a pleasure.
Thank you.
Mentioned to Christine, Haley, and Frida if they, since they grew up on the ranch too, if they had a memory that they might want to say. So you're doing question and answers? Yeah. Okay. So did you, Christine, Haley, Frida? Any of you? Let us know. Did you?
Yeah. Are there any questions or comments? You can come up or they can bring it to you.
We were talking about riding the horses so much, and that was what we did as kids, rode all over, and we lived up on Norris Canyon. And I remember Christine and I don't remember if you were there or not, but we rode all the way from our house through the Doherty, through the Harlan Hills, out to Doherty Road, and we rode back on Doherty Road, and just the whole way through the hills. And can't do that anymore. That was fun.
Any other questions or? It's been fascinating. Yes. I'll bring it to you. Pass it out.
Sandee, Jeff, Roxanne. Would you like to be back in San Ramon again? You think of a way we can make that work?
Yes, if you would want to be back in San Ramon.
We are. We all are. We all live in San Ramon.
That was a political question.
Oh,
So,
I'm Haley's husband, but I had a question. When you were talking about putting the hay up in the barn and driving the tractor, and Jeff was in there working, were you getting paid? Were you getting an allowance, or were you just part of the ranch hands?
I don't remember. I don't think so. No. It was just, not us. I hope they have it. Eventually got big, right?
I have a question for Mr. Wiedemann. How did you deal with rustlers back in the 50s?
Well, let's see, there were some rustlers out there, and how did we deal with them? Well, you know, you always wish you could get your hands around their neck. You couldn't, but, you know, it wasn't so much loading up a truckload of cattle and driving off to the meadows. And I hate to even bring this up at dinner, but a lot of the rustling was just some person driving by in their car and shooting a cow, jumping out with their chainsaw and hacking off of the hindquarters, throwing it in the trunk and going wherever they went. And yeah, wrestling, it still goes on, but everybody is kind of keeping an eye on each other. In my recollection, weren't too many people caught in the act. But, cattlemen missing, find them, supposed to go.
Yeah, the rock. That sounds like my story.
Okay, well, we're friends. The bigger problem was trespassing. And so, you know, trespassers were kind of a problem because as the city grew, folks would show up and bring their motorcycles out and want to go riding in the hills. And, you know, sometimes they would just leave a gate open, sometimes they would cut the fence. And the cattle got, you know, you try to separate them, you got this steers here, and the cows over here, and the bulls there, and you come out, all of a sudden they're all mixed up again. You have to get the whole bunch in and separate them again. So, you know, it's kind of irritating. And so, I guess at some low point in my life, I bought a motorcycle so I could chase it, and so, which I did. And on a couple of occasions, I encountered some young fellows who clearly were, you know, trespassing, didn't really care. And so I said, okay guys, give me your pants. And so, oddly enough, they did. But anyway, so you know, sent them back on their way and on their motorcycles. And not too long after that, I got a call from the sheriff's department. They said, hey, you know, some guy's calling. They said, you took your pants. And the other guy had a $50 bill in his pocket. And I said, well, I don't know. Let's see. So I went down to the police station and had my bag of pants. And we went down. I didn't find anything. And so they, you know, said, oh, well, I guess, you know, things happen. They weren't too upset about it. It was, I guess the word got out, you know, the trespassing really.
I'd like to thank you so much for sharing your stories and enlightening us and giving us sort of a glimpse to a life that many of us have absolutely never experienced. So thank you so much for sharing with us. I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening. Like I said, it really feels good to those of us on the foundation to see so many of you come and actually really, you know, come out for these events. Want to remind you that we do have in July, Mark, the vice mayor, will be speaking about beekeeping, and then in August, Patsy will, so please keep a lookout on our website. And I'd like to thank my colleagues for being here this evening. Thank you to those of you who became a member. We do this because we really care about this property and want to see its legacy continue. So thank you very much. You have a lovely evening.
Well, there's a rake, right? Yeah, that's an old. It's a rake you lift it instead of, it's not a dump rake, but you walk behind it and lift it up.